Hey everyone, I'm Nathan Phillips, and I'm here to pitch you Blah Blah Blah, an original comedic TV series by me. Um, okay, so I'm excited to be pitching you the show because I'm a huge fan of comedy. I love what we do in the shadows, and I think vampires are just fascinating. Um, and although that's not completely what the series revolves around, it's definitely what it's inspired by. I'm a huge comedy writer. I love making fun of people, and I love making fun of myself. I think I'm quite good at it. And for all those reasons, I think I'm the right person to work on the show and create it. And theme wise, the show explores loneliness, it explores friendship, it explores just general charismatic relationships. And it explores horror as just a general genre, but also comedy outside of that. And um, yeah, I think it grapples with a lot. It arguably grapples a lot with, I think, the human experience that we've had in COVID. So I think it'll hit pretty big for people. Um, okay, let's get into it. So blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the log line for my show is okay, so it's an animated show, and Mason, a red, white, and drunken Transylvanian society, is suspected to be a vampire. As people begin to suspiciously disappear, Mason is hunted by his town with limited sensibility. And tonally, uh, Netflix may suggest this after Russian Doll, just because the main protagonist has a mystery that revolves around them, which is very similar to Blah Blah Blah. And um, I would say that it has the humor of What We Do in the Shadows mixed with the plot, somewhat similar to Only Murders in the Building, given that it's all about solving murders in a medieval village. Um, and yeah, let's move on. Okay, so the characters. So we got Mason. He's a retired comedian, and I know that doesn't exist within Transylvania, but we're going to pretend like it does for the sake of comedy here. And so he's a retired comedian. He's also divorced, and his wife and kid moved away. So he's a big pessimist, and that's all contributes to why he gets drunk a lot. And then there's Jerry, who's the person who runs the village tavern. Um, and then there's Brian, they're all friends. And then there's Brian, who's a charismatic family man. He has a family with two kids, and he's a farmer. Like he both Jerry and Brian just care about people, and they can see that Mason's going through a tough time, so they're there to help him out. Um, and Mason doesn't have a very positive outlook on the world. He can be quite grumpy, while the other two are more optimistic, but also it's medieval times in Transylvania, so things aren't super, super optimistic. Um, and the A stories throughout the episode revolve around Mason, and the B stories revolve around what Brian and Jerry are up to, whether it's helping him or helping Mason or, doing something else. And they all, at the end of the day, kind of want to live their life in peace. But they can't really do that because the village suspects that Mason's a murderous vampire. Um, and yeah, okay, let's move on into the general story. Okay, so by the end of the series, they uncover who the true murderer is, and Mason is cleared of all headlines outside of being a bad drunk. And the story arc of the general series is that, yeah, the story unravels as to who the real murderer of the people in the village is, and it starts off with everybody accusing that it's Mason, but once people realize that's not a thing, things begin to get much more tense, and Mason goes searching for who's giving him all the bad headlines. And it could be Dracula, or it could just be some ordinary person in the village. Who really knows? Maybe it's a vampire within the village. You don't know. Yeah, let's move into the pilot episode, though. Okay, so Act 1. So Mason sits in a tavern with his friend, who's also the bartender, Jerry, discussing how boring everything is. A man rushes into the bar and claims that there's been a murder in the village, which promptly concerns Jerry, and Mason continues to drink his red wine. As Mason steps out, his red wine strokes down his chin. And Mason calls out to Jerry because his sense of focus isn't too great. Nobody answers, and Mason keeps sluggishly moving forward. Through some fog, he sees a group of people huddled around a house where a pile of blood lies on the floor. There's plenty of chatter, and Mason yells at people to give him a better look, but nobody will. He yells back at the group with his limited consciousness that the person who died probably had it coming, and nobody gets killed without good reason in the town. People turn back to him, shocked, and shallowly see his face through the fog. They see that his chin has thick, dried, liquidy lines on it. And a woman yells at him that he's a killer, he's a vampire, and the crowd proceeds to charge after him, and he's able to briefly escape. Then Mason meets up with Jerry and Brian in the woods, which is a far hike from the village. Within the forest, they devise a plan to compensate for the angry mob that believes Mason is a blooded killer. As they begin to discuss, Mason has a breakdown. As they begin to discuss what to do, Mason has a breakdown/panic attack that delays time spent trying to come up with a solution. Looking back at the village, the three of them see that Mason's small house was lit on fire and the mob angrily chants his name. This sends Mason in a further panic and he begins to throw up. A storm comes along and the sky begins to rain, which helps cool down the fire. Jerry, Brian, and Mason all are able to find cloaks and they sleep in Brian's home for the night. When they wake up the following morning, they attempt to clean up Mason and whatnot so that he looks ordinary and nobody will suspect him. However, Mason ends up finding more wine within Brian's house, and Brian has to take the wine away from him and clean him up again. And then Brian splits off from Mason and Jerry to go to the market with his family, and Jerry takes Mason with him back to the tavern where he'll keep him hid out. And then one of the guests at the tavern mentions the town's having a meeting on what should be done if somebody gets killed again. And then a town meeting is held the following night, and everyone in town is present at the meeting. The town declares that if Mason is spotted again, or a similar figure is, they should be killed, and anyone who aids that figure will face harsh punishment, possibly even torture. A scream from inside one of the houses is heard during the meeting, and Brian runs into his house to see his wife screaming. One of his children is gone, and there's once again a sighting of blood on the floor. Jerry runs back to the tavern to see that Mason isn't there, and Brian and Jerry run back to the meeting with frantic looks on their faces, and people shout and scream, especially Brian's wife, and that's how the episode ends. Okay, so future episodes, there are a couple future episode log lines I have. So Mason comes upon a large castle where noise, possibly screams, are heard and proceeds to enter in hopes of discovering the murder. Mason, Jerry, and Brian all camp out in the woods one night, except Mason has disappeared and the village has suffered again from another murder. And then with Brian caring for his family and Jerry having to look after their tavern, Mason finds himself an unlikely ally to help him go about solving the mystery. And, you know, the main conflict of this series is the series of murders and the fact that their friendship gets strained. And, character arc-wise, you know, Mason begins a pessimist, but he kind of becomes an optimist after he sees what his friends have done for him. And, you know, things obviously get much more tense. And, that's my pitch. Thank you for listening.